I cannot tell you when it started because I do not remember a beginning. That is the first thing you must understand about what happens when they choose you. There is no moment of selection, no announcement, no contract signed in blood beneath flickering candles in some forgotten sub-basement. The choosing happens in a place before memory, in a time before you were aware of time, and by the moment you realize something is different, you have already been theirs for longer than you can imagine. My name is Marcus Holloway, or it was, and I worked in the Archive Tertius of Hive Primus on Castellan 4, filing shipping manifests for the grain tithes that fed 17 subsidiary hive clusters. I had a desk. I had a regulation stylus with my identification number etched into the grip. I had a small portrait of my mother propped against my cogitator terminal, and I had 37 years of service ahead of me before mandatory retirement to the lower habitation tiers. I was nothing. I was no one. I was exactly the kind of person the Imperium creates by the trillion, and I thought that anonymity was protection. The warmth came first. I remember that much, though I cannot place when I first felt it. It was subtle, like standing too close to a thermal vent, a gentle heat that bloomed in my chest when I was filing a particularly tedious stack of grain requisition forms. I thought nothing of it. The Archive Tertius was poorly ventilated, and we all sweated through our robes during the processing hours. But the warmth would not leave. It followed me home to my hab unit on Tier 47, a 6x8 cell with a fold-down cot and a communal waste facility shared with 11 other workers. The warmth curled around my spine when I tried to sleep. It pulsed behind my eyes when I woke in the artificial dawn. It made my fingertips tingle when I touched the cold metal of my desk, and I thought, perhaps I am ill. Perhaps I should report to the Medicae station and request an examination. I did not report to the Medicae station. I do not know why. The thought would form in my mind, clear and logical, and then something would happen. Some distraction, some sudden task, and hours would pass before I remembered I had intended to seek medical attention. Then the thought would reform, and the same pattern would repeat. I lost days this way. I lost weeks. The warmth grew stronger, and I said nothing, did nothing, and I cannot tell you why except that the choosing had already happened, and the part of me that might have sought help was already beginning to dissolve. There was a woman at the desk beside mine. Her name was Vera Kendrick, and she had worked in Archive Tertius for 19 years. She was efficient and quiet and unremarkable, exactly like me, exactly like everyone in our processing hall. But I began to notice that she watched me. Not obviously, not in any way that would draw attention from the supervisory servitors that drifted between our stations, but in small glances, quick assessments, a flicker of her eyes when she thought I was absorbed in my work. I noticed because noticing things had become easier. The warmth in my chest had sharpened my senses in ways I could not explain. I could hear the scratch of styluses 3 rows away. I could smell the recycled air as if tasting each component, the machine oil and human sweat and incense from the morning benedictions. I could feel the vibration of the great lifts moving in the hive's core, kilometers distant, transmitted through the metal floor and up through my bones. Everything was becoming clearer, and I did not understand that clarity was the first stage of the opening. The first time I heard the voice, I was entering a requisition code for a shipment of grain from the Agri Collective at Harvest Station 7. My fingers were moving automatically across the input pad, a motion I had performed perhaps 1,000,000 times in my years of service, and suddenly there was a whisper inside. My skull, not in my ears, inside, as if someone had pressed their lips against the inner surface of my brain and breathed words directly into the tissue. The whisper said my name, just my name, Marcus, and then nothing. I sat at my desk with my fingers frozen above the keys, and the warmth in my chest flared so intensely I thought I might be having a cardiac event, and then it faded, and my fingers completed the requisition code, and I filed the manifest, and I said nothing to anyone. I told myself I had imagined it. I told myself it was fatigue, or the poor air quality, or the stress of the recent tithe audits. I told myself anything except the truth, which was that something had spoken inside me and I had recognized its voice as if I had been hearing it all my life. Vera Kendrick continued to watch me. I caught her doing it more frequently now, and something in her expression had changed. There was a quality to her attention that I could not name, something between anticipation and reverence, and it made me uncomfortable in ways I could not articulate. I began to watch her in return, studying her movements, her habits, the way she organized her filing stacks, and the precise angle at which she held her stylus. I was looking for something, though I did not know what. The warmth in my chest seemed to pulse with approval when I observed her, as if my attention was somehow correct, as if I was following a pattern that had been laid out for me long before I understood there was a pattern to follow. The second time I heard the voice, it spoke for longer. I was in the communal refreshment alcove, standing in the queue for reconstituted nutrition paste, surrounded by dozens of my fellow archivists in their identical grey robes. The voice rose up from somewhere deep inside me, from a place I had not known existed, and it said, "You are becoming ready. The vessel must be prepared. The opening approaches." I dropped my nutrition tray. The clatter drew attention from the workers around me, and I stood there with paste spattering my boots, and the warmth was a furnace now, so intense I thought my skin might blister, and no one else seemed to notice anything unusual. No one seemed to hear what I heard. No one seemed to feel the presence that had begun to coil around my consciousness like a serpent settling into its den. I picked up my tray with trembling hands, and I mumbled an apology, and I returned to my desk, and I did not eat that day. I could not eat. The warmth filled me too completely to leave room for hunger. I should tell you about the symbol. This is important. This is the second hook that sinks into the meat of the memory, the thing I keep returning to when I try to understand how I came to be here, in this state, writing these words that may never be read. I found the symbol carved into the metal frame of my cot, 3 days after the second voice. I did not remember carving it. I had no memory of taking a sharp object and scratching lines into the frame that held my thin mattress. But the symbol was there, fresh and bright where it had scored through the patina of decades, and when I looked at it, the warmth surged so powerfully that I lost several seconds of consciousness. When I came back to myself, I was kneeling on the floor of my hab unit, with my forehead pressed against the cold metal, and my lips were moving, forming words in a language I did not know, had never learned, could not possibly speak. The symbol was angular and strange, not quite like anything in the imperial lexicon of approved iconography, and yet it felt familiar, as if I had been seeing it all my life without recognizing what I saw. I began to find the symbol in other places, scratched into the surface of my desk at work, etched into the fogged mirror of the communal washroom, traced in the condensation on my drinking vessel, always in my handwriting, always fresh, and never with any memory of having made the marks. I was doing it in my sleep, I realized, or in moments of absence that I could not account for, gaps in my days that I had not noticed until I began looking for them. I would be filing a manifest, and then I would be somewhere else in the archive, standing before a shelf I had no reason to visit, with my fingers aching as if I had been gripping something tightly. I would be lying in my cot, staring at the stained ceiling, and then I would be standing at my small window, looking out at the hive's eternal night, with hours of darkness behind me that I could not recall. The voice spoke more frequently now, and it was teaching me things. It told me about the opening, it told me about the vessel, it told me what I was becoming, and I listened, and I did not resist, and I understand now that resistance had become impossible long before I knew there was something to resist. Vera Kendrick spoke to me for the first time in our 9 years of adjacent service. She approached my desk during the evening processing period, when the archive was quiet and the supervisory servitors were cycling through their recharge protocols, and she stood before me with her hands clasped and her eyes bright with that terrible anticipation I had come to recognize. She said, "It is happening faster than we expected. You are almost ready." And I should have been afraid. I should have reported her to the arbitrators. I should have done anything except what I did, which was to smile, to feel the warmth bloom outward through my entire body. to hear the voice inside me say, yes, yes, she has served well, she has prepared the way. Vera Kendrick had been watching me for years, I understood then, long before the warmth began, long before the choosing became apparent. She had been watching and waiting and doing small things, imperceptible things, things I would never have noticed because I was too ordinary to imagine that anyone might be paying attention to me at all. She had placed certain documents in my processing queue. She had arranged certain assignments. She had, in ways I would never fully understand, been shaping the conditions of my life to make me suitable for what I was becoming. She was not alone. As the weeks passed and the warmth grew stronger and the voice spoke more clearly, I began to see them everywhere, other watchers, other servants of whatever had chosen me. They were in the archive, in the habtiers, in the refectory queues, and the transit stations and the endless grey corridors of Hive Primus. They wore the same faces as everyone else. They performed the same labor. But when they looked at me, I could see the recognition in their eyes, and I could feel their attention like pressure against my skin, and the voice would name them. Brother, sister, faithful. They had been there all along, woven into the fabric of Imperial life, invisible in their ordinariness, waiting for someone like me to be prepared. The transformation began in my hands. I noticed it first when I was filing a manifest, the same motion I had performed uncountable times, and my fingers felt strange against the keys. The skin seemed looser, as if it no longer fit properly over the bones beneath. I examined my hands in the harsh light of my desk lamp, and I saw that the color had changed, subtle but unmistakable, a grayish undertone spreading beneath the familiar brown. The warmth pulsed in my palms, and I flexed my fingers, and they moved smoothly, more smoothly than they should have, as if the joints had been lubricated by something that was not me. I told myself it was the lighting, I told myself it was fatigue, I told myself all the reasonable things that reasonable people tell themselves when they are becoming unreasonable, and I continued my work, and I said nothing, and the voice inside me laughed softly, fondly, like a parent watching a child take its first steps. My eyes changed next. I saw it in the communal washroom mirror, another instance of the symbol scratched into the glass beside my reflection, and I leaned close to examine the mark, and instead found myself examining my own face. The eyes that looked back at me were not quite the eyes I remembered. The irises had developed flecks of color that had not been there before, threads of amber and gold weaving through the familiar brown, and they seemed to catch the light in ways that ordinary eyes should not. When I blinked, there was a fraction of a second where I saw differently, where the spectrum shifted and the world revealed layers I had never perceived. Colors that did not have names, shadows that moved independently of their sources. Then I would blink again and my vision would return to normal, and I would stand there trembling, gripping the edge of the basin, and the warmth would comfort me, wrapping around my thoughts like a blanket, telling me that everything was progressing correctly, that the vessel was becoming suitable, that the opening would soon be complete. I stopped eating almost entirely. I did not need to. The warmth sustained me, filling the hollow spaces where hunger should have been, providing an energy that seemed to come from somewhere outside my body. I lost weight rapidly, my robes hanging loose on my diminishing frame, and my colleagues began to comment concern in their voices that I recognized as genuine. But when I tried to eat, when I forced myself to swallow the nutrition paste that was our daily ration, it would not stay down. My body rejected it, as if the ordinary sustenance of Imperial life was now poison to whatever I was becoming. Only water remained tolerable, and even that had begun to taste strange, each mouthful carrying flavors that should not have been there, hints of copper and ash, and something sweet that might have been corruption or might have been perfection. Vera Kendrick visited my hab unit on the night the fever began. She came alone, slipping through the narrow corridor while my neighbors slept, and she knelt beside my cot where I lay shaking, drenched in sweat. That smelled like incense. Her hands were cool against my burning forehead, and her voice was gentle, almost maternal, as she spoke words I did not understand, but somehow recognized. The language of the symbol, the language the voice had been teaching me in fragments, in dreams, in the moments of absence that now consumed more and more of my days. She was praying over me, I realized, or performing some ritual that wore the shape of prayer, and the warmth responded, surging upward through my spine, curling around my skull, pressing against the inside of my eyes until I thought they might burst from the pressure of whatever was trying to see through them. I have been dreaming of a place that is not a place. This is the third hook, the thing I return to most often, the image that haunts me even now as the transformation continues, and my grip on what I was grows ever more tenuous. In the dreams, I am standing in a vast darkness that is not darkness, a space without space, and there is something with me, not the voice, something larger, something that the voice serves. I cannot see it because seeing would require eyes, and in that place, eyes are inadequate. I cannot hear it because hearing would require a mind capable of processing what it speaks, and my mind is still too small, too limited, too burdened by the shape of what I was. But I can feel it. Emperor, help me, I can feel it. It is vast and ancient and utterly without anything I would recognize as thought or emotion, and yet it has chosen me, specifically me, Marcus Holloway of Archive Tertius, Tithe Counter and Manifest Filer, unremarkable in every way except that somehow, somewhere, something about the pattern of my existence made me suitable for what they needed. In the dreams, I understand that I am a door, I am a threshold, I am being hollowed out so that something can pass through me into the material world, and the warmth is the carving, the patient excavation of everything I was to make room for everything. It will be. The changes to my body accelerated. My skin began to take on a translucent quality, as if the flesh itself was thinning, becoming less substantial, preparing to be replaced by something else. Beneath the surface I could see shadows moving, dark shapes that pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat that was no longer entirely my own. My bones ached constantly, a deep structural pain that suggested they were being reshaped from within, reforming to specifications I could not imagine. Sometimes I would wake in my cot to find my limbs bent at angles that should have been impossible, and I would watch myself slowly unfold into something resembling a normal human configuration, and the voice would whisper comfort, would promise that the pain was temporary, that the vessel was nearly complete, that soon the opening would happen, and then there would be no more pain at all. Vera Kendrick brought others to see me. They came in ones and twos, slipping through the shadows of the Hab tier, and they would stand at the foot of my cot and look at me with expressions of wonder and terror and desperate hope. I recognized some of them from the archive. Others I had never seen before, strangers from other tiers, other sectors, united only by their service to whatever had claimed me. They spoke in the ritual language, offering prayers or invocations, and sometimes they would reach out to touch my transformed skin with trembling fingers, and they would gasp at the heat of me, at the wrongness of my texture, at the way the flesh seemed to move beneath their touch, as if something inside was responding to their presence. The voice named them all, told me their roles, explained the hierarchy of the cult that had woven itself through Hive Primus like a parasitic growth, invisible to the authorities, patient in its preparations, waiting for someone like me to complete their long design. I tried to warn someone. I need you to know that. I need you to understand that the part of me that was. Still, Marcus Holloway fought against what was happening, even as the resistance became more and more futile. There was a moment, perhaps 2 weeks before the opening, when I managed to reach a Vox terminal in the archive's communication alcove. My transformed fingers struggled with the keys, my changed vision making the symbols swim before me, but I managed to connect to the Arbeits precinct station, and I tried to speak, tried to tell them what was happening, tried to scream that there was a cult in the hive, and they had made me into something terrible. But the voice rose up inside me, thunderous and absolute, and it seized control of my mouth, and what came out was not a warning but a prayer in that alien language, and the Arbeits dispatch servitor processed my call as routine religious observance and disconnected. I stood there with the Vox piece in my hand, weeping tears that were no longer entirely liquid, and the warmth embraced me, comforted me, told me that the attempt was natural, that resistance was expected, that it did not matter, that I was nearly ready, that the opening was so close now that nothing could prevent it. The voice began to have a shape in my mind. This was new and terrifying, and also strangely beautiful in a way that disgusted the remnants of my human sensibility. Before, it had been just sound, just words, but now it was becoming something I could almost perceive, a form that my consciousness was slowly becoming capable of apprehending. It was angular and flowing at once. It was too large for any space, and yet it fit inside me perfectly. It was the source of the warmth, I understood now, the thing that had been pressing against me from the inside since before I knew there was something to press against. And soon it would no longer need to press. Soon it would simply step through the door I had become, and Marcus Holloway would be a memory, a shell, a skin to be worn by something that had never been human and never would be. Vera. Kendrick told me about the summoning. She sat beside my cot in the final days, holding my hand as if I was a dying relative, and she explained with the patience of a true believer what would happen on the night of the opening. The cult had been preparing for decades, gathering the materials, perfecting the rituals, choosing vessels through methods I did not understand and did not want to understand. I was not the first. There had been others before me, going back generations, though none had been as suitable as I apparently was. None had taken to the preparation as quickly or as completely. Some had died in the process, their bodies unable to contain what was being placed inside them. Some had been discovered by the authorities and destroyed before they could be opened. But I was special. I was perfect. I was the door that would finally stay open long enough for something to come through. She told me about the daemon, not the voice, the thing beyond the voice, the entity that waited in whatever dimension or sub-reality existed beyond the warp's roiling chaos, patient and hungry and ancient beyond measure. It had been trying to enter the material world for thousands of years. It had touched countless minds, whispered to countless servants, prepared countless vessels, and it had been turned back each time by circumstance or resistance, or the random cruelty of fate. But now there was me. Now there was this hive, this moment, this precise configuration of ritual and flesh and belief. The daemon would come through, and it would wear my body, and it would walk through the streets of Hive Primus in my shape, and no one would know until it was far too late to stop what had begun. I should have been horrified. I was horrified, somewhere in the shrinking corner of myself that still remembered being human. But the horror was distant now, muffled by the warmth, submerged beneath the voice that had become so loud it drowned out my own thoughts. I lay in my cot, and I watched my hands move without my direction, tracing the symbol in the air, and I felt my lips form words I did not choose, and I understood that I was already mostly gone. The vessel was nearly complete. The door was nearly open. Marcus Holloway was a fading pattern, a residue of identity that would burn away entirely when the daemon took its place inside my hollowed flesh. The night of the opening came without ceremony. There was no warning, no announcement, no ritual preparation that I was aware of. I simply woke from a dream of the vast darkness, and I knew with absolute certainty that it was happening, that the barrier had finally grown thin enough, that the door was swinging wide. The warmth in my chest was incandescent now, so intense that I thought my ribs must be charring, my organs cooking in the heat of the presence that filled me. I rose from my cot without choosing to rise. I walked through the corridors of the Habtir without choosing to walk. My body moved with a grace it had never possessed, the transformation finally complete enough for the thing inside me to control it properly. And as I moved, I saw them, the faithful, Vera Kendrick and all the others, lining the corridors, kneeling as I passed, their faces radiant with joy and terror and desperate hope. They led me down, through service passages and maintenance shafts, and forgotten tunnels that wound through the hive's infrastructure like veins through living tissue. Down past the manufacturing tiers and the waste processing levels and the heat exchange substations, down into the dark heart of the hive where no one went, where the light of the Emperor did not reach, where something had been waiting for so very long. The space they brought me to was vast and organic, a natural cavern that the hive's builders had sealed away and forgotten, and it was filled with symbols. The symbol, my symbol. carved into every surface, painted in substances I did not want to identify, glowing with a light that was not light. The cult had been preparing this place for generations, and now it was ready, and I was ready, and there was nothing left to wait for. They arranged me at the center of the chamber. They did not need to bind me or restrain me. I was long past the ability to resist. I stood with my arms spread wide and my head tilted back, and I felt the warmth reaching its crescendo, and I felt the barrier between worlds thinning to nothing, and I felt something begin to push through from the other side. The voice was screaming now, not in words but in pure exultation, pure triumph, pure anticipation of the moment it had worked toward for longer than I could comprehend. And I was screaming too, what was left of me, Marcus Holloway, tithe counter and manifest filer, screaming a final protest that no one heard or heeded as my consciousness began to tear. The thing that entered me was not what I expected. I do not know what I expected. Something hot, perhaps, something violent, something that would shatter what remained of my identity in a single overwhelming moment. But the daemon did not shatter me. It absorbed me. It wrapped around the remnants of my consciousness and drew them inward, folding them into itself like someone folding a piece of paper smaller and smaller until it cannot be seen but still exists, compressed into an impossible density. I was not destroyed. I was contained. I was pushed to the very edge of existence, to a tiny corner of the thing I had become, and I was made to watch as the daemon opened my eyes for the first time and looked out at the material world through the door I had spent months becoming. It was vast. That is all I can say about what I felt in that moment. Vast and ancient and utterly alien in its thought processes, in its desires, in its fundamental nature. I was inside it now, a speck of human consciousness floating in an ocean of something that had never been human and could never comprehend what humanity was. It did not hate me. It did not love me. It did not regard me as anything except a component, a mechanism, a useful configuration of matter that had made this moment possible. The vessel, it called me, the door, and it was pleased with the door, satisfied with the construction, ready to walk through and begin whatever purpose had brought it across the gulfs between realities to take up residence in my flesh. Vera Kendrick was the first to die. I want you to know that. I want you to understand that even she, who had served this thing with such devotion for so many years, was nothing to it except fuel. The daemon raised my hand, and reality bent around my fingers, and Vera Kendrick came apart in ways that should not have been possible, her body dissolving into components that fed the daemon's presence, that stabilized its connection to the material world, that anchored it more firmly in the flesh it wore. She did not even have time to look surprised. She had expected something, I think, some reward, some transformation of her own. But she was not a vessel, she was not a door, she was simply a servant who had outlived her usefulness, and the daemon consumed her with the casual indifference of a human swatting an insect. The others died more slowly. The daemon took its time with them, experimenting with its new form, testing the limits of what it could do with a physical body after so long as pure essence. I watched from my compressed corner of consciousness as it twisted and broke and remade the faithful who had prepared its way, and I felt nothing, could feel nothing. The distance between what I was and what I had become too vast for emotion to cross. This was what they had worshipped. This was what they had dedicated their lives to summoning. This cold, vast, purposeless hunger that regarded them as nothing more than resources to be consumed. If there was a lesson in it, I was too diminished to learn it. If there was irony, I was too compressed to appreciate it. When it was done with the cultists, the daemon began to walk. It used my legs, my stride, my balance, moving through the tunnels with a familiarity it should not have possessed. But of course it knew this place. It had been watching through my eyes for months, learning the geography of the hive, memorizing the routes and the schedules and the patterns of imperial life. It had been preparing for this moment while I thought I was simply going about my ordinary existence, and now it climbed toward the surface with purpose, with intent, with a plan that I could not perceive but knew must be terrible beyond imagining. The lower tiers did not notice. The manufactorum workers and the sump dwellers, and the endless masses of humanity packed into the hive's lower levels, glanced at my passing form and saw nothing unusual. A grey-robed archivist, walking with unusual grace perhaps, but nothing worth remarking upon. The daemon had learned its lessons well. It knew how to wear a human body, how to move through human spaces, how to be invisible in the way that only the perfectly ordinary can be invisible. And I was trapped inside it, watching through eyes I no longer controlled, feeling the heat of its presence where the warmth used to be, knowing that whatever it intended to do, I would witness every moment without the ability to interfere. But something happened that the daemon did not expect. This is the fourth hook, the thing that keeps me writing even now, the fragment of hope that I cling to even as I feel myself dissolving further into the vastness that contains me. The daemon was climbing through a transit corridor surrounded by hundreds of Imperial citizens on their way to their shift assignments. When it stopped, my body stopped. The daemon's attention, vast and terrible and focused, suddenly turned inward, toward the compressed corner where I still existed, where Marcus Holloway still maintained some minimal coherence. And I felt something I had not expected. I felt the daemon's confusion. I felt its surprise. I felt for the first time since the opening a crack in its absolute confidence. "You are still here," it said. Not the voice I had been hearing for months, something deeper, something that came from the core of the entity itself. "You should be gone. The vessel should be empty." I did not understand what it meant. I was nearly gone. I was a speck, a mote, a residue of consciousness so faint that I could barely perceive myself. But the daemon was right. I was still here. I had not been absorbed completely. I had not been dissolved into its vastness. Some part of Marcus Holloway remained, clinging to existence with a stubbornness that surprised even me, and the daemon did not know why, and that uncertainty was the first weakness I had ever perceived in it. The following hours are difficult to describe. The daemon continued its journey through the hive, but its attention was divided now. Part of it focused on the external world, and part of it turned inward, probing at my continued existence, trying to understand why I had not been fully consumed. It found the answer eventually. I felt it discover the truth, felt its recognition, felt something that might have been anger if such a vast entity was capable of anything so human as anger. The answer was in my ordinariness, in my completeness, in the very qualities that had made me suitable as a vessel. I had been chosen because I was unremarkable, because there was nothing in my psyche that would resist the transformation, nothing that would fight against the opening. But that same lack of resistance meant that there was nothing to destroy, no ego to shatter, no will to break. I had accepted what was happening so completely that I had simply folded inward, compressed rather than consumed, preserved in my very surrender. It was trying to digest me now. I could feel it working at the edges of my compressed consciousness, attempting to break down the last vestiges of Marcus Holloway and integrate them into itself, but every time it pushed, I folded smaller. Every time it reached for me, I slipped away, not through any effort of my own, but through the same passivity that had made me a perfect vessel. I could not fight the daemon. I could not resist it. But I could persist somehow, in the spaces between its attention, in the cracks of its vast awareness, and my persistence was disrupting something essential in its design. The daemon's grip on my body began to slip. Small things at first, a twitch in my left hand that it did not intend, a stumble that had no cause, a moment where my eyes focused on something the daemon had not chosen to examine, revealing a shrine to the God Emperor that made its presence flinch with something like discomfort. I was not controlling my body. I was incapable of that. But my continued existence was introducing noise into the signal, static into the possession, and the daemon could not perform the precise manipulations it needed. While my consciousness persisted like a splinter in its vast mind, it retreated. That is the closest word I have for what happened next. The daemon's presence pulled back from the surface of my awareness, diving deeper into the flesh it wore, coiling around my spine and my organs and my bones. It was still there, it was still in control, but it had stopped trying to eliminate me, had accepted my persistence as an inconvenience rather than a threat, And in that acceptance I found something I had not expected. I found a position, a vantage point, a place from which I could observe what the daemon was doing and perhaps understand what it intended. The plan revealed itself to me in fragments over the following days. The daemon was here for the hive's governor, not to kill him, to replace him. It would climb the social hierarchy of Hive Primus, using my unremarkable face and my unremarkable credentials to gain access to increasingly sensitive areas until it could reach the governor's inner sanctum and perform another opening, another transformation, another door. But this time, the vessel would be someone with real power, someone who could make decisions that affected billions of lives, someone who could open the hive's defenses to forces from beyond, could invite the true invasion that this single daemon was merely the vanguard of. I am writing this warning while the daemon sleeps. I did not know it could sleep. I did not know that even entities from beyond the warp required something like rest. But for a few hours each cycle, its presence dims, its attention withdraws, and I find myself able to move my fingers, able to access my own thoughts, able to scratch words into whatever surface is available. I have been leaving messages throughout the hive, on walls and floors and documents that pass through the archive where I still work, still perform my duties, still file manifests while something ancient and terrible rides inside my flesh. I do not know if anyone will find them. I do not know if anyone will understand. But I am still here, still Marcus Holloway, still the door that refuses to close completely, and I am telling anyone who will listen what is happening. The daemon does not know about these messages, or it knows and does not care. I cannot tell which is true. When it wakes, it uses my body with increasing confidence, its presence stabilizing despite my persistence, learning to work around the noise I introduce. It attends meetings I never would have been invited to. It speaks with a persuasiveness I never possessed. It climbs the hierarchy of Archive Tertius with a speed that should raise suspicions but somehow does not, its words carrying a weight that bends reality just slightly, that makes people believe things they would not otherwise believe, want things they would not otherwise want. In 3 months, I have risen from manifest filer to sub-coordinator. In 3 more, I will be something higher. And the governor's sanctum is not so far away, not so unreachable, not so protected that a determined entity with millennia of patience cannot find a way inside. There is a man named James Porter who has begun to notice me. He works in the compliance office, a minor functionary whose job is to detect irregularities in the behavior of archive personnel. He has been watching me the way Vera Kendrick once watched me, but his attention has a different quality. Suspicion rather than reverence, concern rather than anticipation. He has noticed my rapid advancement. He has noticed the changes in my behavior, the new grace in my movements, the way my eyes sometimes catch the light at angles that are not quite right. He has been asking questions discreetly, and the daemon is aware of him, and I can feel its consideration, its calculation, its decision about whether James Porter should be destroyed or subverted or simply watched. I am trying to help him. In the moments when the daemon sleeps, I leave messages where I think he might find them, warnings, details, the truth about what I am and what is using me. I do not know if he has found any of them. I do not know if he would believe them if he did, but he is my last hope, the final hook on which I hang any possibility of preventing what the daemon intends. If he understands what is happening, if he can alert the authorities, if the Arbites or the Inquisition can be made to see the truth behind my unremarkable face, then perhaps this story will have a different ending than the one the daemon has planned. Perhaps the door can be closed. Perhaps Marcus Holloway can finally rest. But I am so tired. That is what I want you to understand, whoever finds these words. I have been fighting to exist for so long, compressed into such a tiny space, and the daemon grows stronger every day while I grow weaker. My messages are becoming harder to write. My moments of autonomy are becoming shorter. Sometimes I wake from the daemon's sleep and I cannot remember my own name, cannot remember what I was before the warmth began. Cannot remember why I am leaving these frantic scratches on surfaces that probably no one will ever read. The door is closing from the inside, the daemon learning to seal the cracks I have been slipping through, and soon there will be nothing left of me but the shell, the face, the vessel walking through the hive on business that serves purposes beyond human comprehension. James Porter came to my desk yesterday. The daemon was awake, in full control, and it smiled my smile and spoke with my voice and answered his questions with a confidence I never possessed. He left looking reassured, his suspicions apparently calmed, and I felt the daemon's satisfaction at having neutralized a potential threat. But later, when the daemon slept, I found a note in my pocket, a note I do not remember receiving, a note in handwriting I do not recognize that says only, "I know what you are, and I am coming." I do not know if the note is real. I do not know if James Porter truly suspects, or if this is some trick of the daemon, some test to see if I will reveal myself. I do not know anything anymore except that I am still here, still writing, still leaving these warnings in the desperate hope that someone will understand before it is too late. The daemon wakes soon. I can feel its presence stirring in the depths of my transformed flesh, rising toward the surface to resume its patient climb toward power. I have perhaps minutes left to write, to warn, to leave some trace of Marcus Holloway in the world before I am compressed into nothing. If you find this, if you read these words, if you understand what I am trying to tell you, then know that the enemy is not outside the walls, it is not in the void between stars or the corrupt corners of the galaxy, it is here, it is wearing a human face, it is walking through the corridors of power with a patience that spans millennia, and it is coming for everything you love. Find James Porter, find the Archive Tertius in Hive Primus. Find the man who used to be Marcus Holloway, and destroy what is left of him before the daemon completes its design. I am the door, I am the vessel, I am what happens when chaos chooses you, and I am begging you, whoever you are, to close me before something worse walks through. The warmth is rising. The daemon wakes. I am